want to tell you a story. About a story. And it's about the time that I discovered that most adults have no idea what they're talking about. And also, they have no problem saying whatever comes to mind, whether it's even vaguely true or not. It was in the middle of the summer and I was 12 years old. And I was the kind of kid who was always showing off. And I have 7 brothers and sisters, and I was always getting lost in the crowd. So, I would do practically anything for attention. So one day I was at the swimming pool, and I decided to do a flip from the high board. The kind of dive when you're temporarily, magically suspended midair. And everyone around the pool goes, "Wow! That's incredible! That's amazing!" Now, I'd never done a flip before, but I thought, how hard can it be? You just somersault, straighten out right before you hit the water. So I did, but I missed the pool. And I landed, poof, on the concrete edge. And I broke my back. Now, I spent the next few months in traction in the children's ward in the hospital. And for quite a while, I couldn't move or talk, and I was just sort of floating. And for quite a while, I was in the same unit with the kids who'd been burned, and they were hanging in these rotating slings, sort of like rotisseries or spits, that would turn you around and around, so that their burns could be bathed in these cool liquids. Then one day, one of the doctors came to see me, and he told me that I wouldn't be able to walk again. And I remember thinking, this guy is crazy. I mean, is he even a doctor? Who knows? Although I couldn't say that or anything else since I couldn't talk. But I was sure he had no idea what he was saying. And of course I was going to walk. I just had to concentrate. Keep trying to make contact with my feet, convince them, will them to move. Now the worst thing about this was the volunteers came every afternoon to read to me. And they'd lean over the bed and they'd say, "Hello, Laurie," really enunciating each word as if I'd also gone deaf. And they'd open the book. "So, where were we? Oh yes, the gray rabbit was hopping down the road, and guess where he went?" Well, nobody knows. The farmer doesn't know. The farmer's wife doesn't know. The farmer's son doesn't know. And on, and nobody knew where the rabbit had gone, but just about everybody seemed to care. Now, before this had happened, I'd been reading books like Tale of Two Cities and Crime and Punishment. So the Gray Rabbit stories were kind of a slow torture. Now anyway, eventually I did get on my feet, and then for 2 years I wore a huge metal brace that was sort of like a Frankenstein design. I was basically like a freak. And I got very obsessed with John F. Kennedy, because he had back problems too, and he was the president. Now much later in my life, when someone would ask me what my childhood was like, sometimes I would tell them the story about the hospital. And it was a short way of telling them certain things about myself. How I'd learned not to trust certain people. And how horrible it was to listen to long, pointless stories, like the one about the gray rabbits. But there was always something weird about telling a story that made me very uneasy. Like something was missing. Then one day, when I was in the middle of telling it, I was describing the little rotisseries that the kids were hanging in. And suddenly, it was like I was back in the hospital. just exactly the way it had been. And I remembered the missing part. It was the way the ward sounded at night. It was the sounds of all the children crying and screaming. It was the sounds that children make when they're dying. And then I remember the rest of it. The heavy smell of medicine. The smell of burned skin. How afraid I was. And the way some of the beds would be empty in the morning. And the way the nurses would never talk about what had happened to these kids. They'd just go on making up the beds and cleaning up around the ward. And so the thing about this story was that actually I'd only told the part about myself. I'd cleaned it up just the way the nurses had. And that's what I think is the creepiest thing about stories. You get to the point you're making usually about something about yourself or something you've learned. You take your story and you hold on to it. And every time you tell it, you forget it more